So thank you again for joining us. And I guess I kick it back to Karen. Or do you want me to do the VHB team? Or are you going to do that, Karen?
I think Jen and I will introduce ourselves, and then we'll move forward. Jen, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Jen Conley, and I'm acting as the project advisor at this point of the project.
And I'm Karen Sentoff, a transportation consultant with VHB and the primary technical lead on this project. Alrighty, so you may recall that we were with the community back in September to hear about concerns and opportunities for the downtown area and really narrow our focus on where we should be concentrating our efforts for this project. We've spent some time in looking at existing conditions and resource constraints, and then have spent the bulk of the last couple of months looking at conceptual alternatives for the corridor basically from First Street along Grand Avenue through the Merchants Row area and down towards Marble Mill Park. And so today we're bringing those alternatives to you all, hoping to get lots of feedback so that we can refine a preferred alternative in the coming month, and then hopefully ultimately bring that to the village trustees for their support, so that this project really is the groundwork for a number of projects going forward for the downtown. And there are a lot of words on this slide, so I don't want to scare anyone off, but we did develop a draft project purpose, and this will be followed up by the draft project needs. And this really is what's compelling this effort and will help when we get to the point of seeking out funding for some of these projects to actually get shovels in the ground. So the purpose of the downtown scoping study is to prioritize improvements to traffic circulation, mobility, safety, and aesthetics that will foster a vibrant and multimodal downtown in support of local businesses while accommodating vehicle and truck traffic. Improvements focus along Merchants Row and Grand Avenue from Marble Mill Park to First Street, specifically at the intersection of Grand Avenue with Canada Street and the Merchants Row parking area. And I put all of that language in front of you all, mostly so that if there's any last feedback on the project purpose, and again on the next slide, the project needs, we'd like to hear about that. And so I will make my email available at the end of the evening so that if folks do have thoughts about it, I welcome that feedback. And then the draft project needs, what's really compelling this effort is the need to improve traffic circulation and safety in that downtown area, to enhance pedestrian bicyclist mobility and safety, and to enable placemaking opportunities. So giving that downtown a sense of place, and providing the aesthetic and streetscape that goes along with that. So again, lots of words on the slide, but I wanted to make this information available. So if folks had thoughts about it, certainly let us know towards the end of this evening or via email afterwards. All right, so how I'm proposing that we sort of dive into the various alternatives here is really breaking up the downtown area into a couple of different focal areas. And what we'll do is, as we chip away through these various focus areas, we will talk about the alternatives for that area, and then towards the end have a pause to make sure there's not any sort of outstanding clarifying questions about what we've shown for alternatives. But then I think we'll hold the bulk of the comments and feedback towards the end of the evening. So if folks have questions about what they're seeing on the screen for a particular alternative, I welcome that either via the chat or raise hand, so that we can get those issues sort of cleaned up before we move forward, because there is a lot of content to get through. So I don't want to miss anything, but then we'll hold off for real comments and deeper questions towards the end.
So just to emphasize, in the middle of the presentation, there'll be a pause for you to either raise your hand or in the chat, place any questions. So that'll just be for clarifying information, something you're not clear on. Anything that is more commentary, I hate this, I like this, please add that. That comes at the end when we're looking for the public feedback. If you do want to type it in the chat when it comes to mind, I will file it away and we'll bring it up again when we get to that point, and I can call on you at that point. So if you do want to type a comment in, that's something we will file away till the public comment period.
Thanks, Jen. All righty, so let's get started here. Our first focus area is the intersection of Grand Avenue and Canada Street, which you're seeing in the top right there. I'm sure all of you are very familiar with this area of the downtown. And so what you're seeing on your screen here, just to orient us, the Village Green is down towards the left and Canada Street sort of jutting out towards the right. And then Grand Avenue and Merchants Row are sort of swooping through the middle of the screen there. And we're really focusing our attention just on the intersection. So looking at sort of this, what is currently sort of this five-way configuration that you see on the screen. And with alternative one here, what we're proposing is to update the curb line, shorten crosswalks, go ahead and remove that left turn lane that's coming off of Canada Street, which is a warranted removal of that lane. So we checked on that. And some of the other features that you see sort of beyond the core of the intersection here along the approaches, we'll touch on, and some of the other alternatives that we're looking at later on in the evening. But we're really focusing our attention on that five-way intersection. So just sort of updating the curb lines here and sort of formalizing and delineating that intersection is the proposal here in alternative one. In contrast to that, alternative two not only is sort of updating those curb lines and sort of drawing the intersection to a more manageable size than what's out there on the pavement today, but it's really tightening that intersection geometry. So, slowing folks down and really making folks navigate this intersection slowly. So it's still maintaining that through traffic along Grand Avenue and Merchants Row. We're not implementing any stop for signalization or anything like that. So it's still maintaining that through traffic. There would be a stop condition for the folks coming off of Canada Street and out of the Merchants Row parking area. But it's really just tightening that geometry up so that folks really feel like they need to reduce their speeds through this area. And we certainly heard that come through when we were with the community back in September at the local concerns meeting. A couple of other features just to note on this alternative. We've turned the new entrance to the Ace Hardware into a one-way entrance here, just to make that space to draw in that geometry. And again, updating curb lines and shortening crosswalks to really make this a more manageable intersection from the standpoint of a pedestrian. And then the third alternative that we have for the intersection is a roundabout. So what you see laid out here is a 120-foot inscribed diameter roundabout. It does, handle large trucks. So I've run the truck movements through here to make sure that they can make all the major movements. So, they will be using that truck apron that you see here in red for their rear tires, but can certainly make this movement. And one of the big advantages here is that it really makes folks slow down and sort of look around and see what's happening in the downtown. So you know, on the major movements, we have splitter islands that helps sort of channelize folks and gets folks to slow down. And then obviously around that rotary movement, folks really have to use a slow rate of speed to be able to make those movements. So in terms of traffic calming, this is definitely one alternative to sort of address some of those issues again that we were hearing at the local concerns meeting. Some other things to note here with the roundabout is just you know, maintaining some of the parking that's along Canada Street, but still being able to sort of channelize folks into the roundabout, and you know, having a one-way access from the Merchants Row area into the roundabout. It would be tough to fit two-way access there. We could certainly look at it, but one way seemed to work pretty well with the geometries that are available out there. So that is the roundabout alternative, and we will certainly see these come back up as we sort of shift focus around to the Merchants Row area and to Canada Street. So these will come back up, but those are the three intersection alternatives. And the next slide, we'll get into a little bit of the evaluation on that. And so I won't dig into the evaluation matrix for all of the alternatives that we're looking at this evening. But for this one, it seemed prudent to talk through some of the sort of advantages and impacts to each of those three alternatives in a little more detail. And I'll just sort of preface the rest of the evening with, you know, a lot of the other alternatives that we were looking at didn't have major impacts and were really more of a preference from the community standpoint. So we really want your input on those. But this one seemed like there was a little more to tell about the story here. So I won't make you sift through matrices with me all evening. This is the only one that you'll have to endure. So what we're seeing here is just those three alternatives across the top, with, you know, an evaluation on a relative cost scale, some of the safety and mobility features of each of those, the impacts, some of the resource constraints that we've looked at, and then getting to some of the community character and whether or not this satisfies the purpose and need. So looking across the three options, we're definitely improving ped access and safety by shortening up those crosswalks in alternative 1 and 2. In the roundabout, you know, we're providing access for all of the legs of the intersection. So, you know, in terms of pedestrian mobility, really rounding things out there, and shortening the crossing, so you really only have to deal with one direction of traffic at a time as a pedestrian. So certainly safer from that standpoint. For bike access, you know, I noted that we're sort of delineating those bike lanes on either side of alternative 1 and 2, and we'll get into that in more detail later. And then with alternative 3, with the roundabout, we're actually proposing that some of the bike circulation happens on Church Street, and we'll get into that in more detail later. And then for vehicle safety, certainly, you know, bringing those curbs in and really delineating the intersection helps to reduce confusion. And then we're saying for the roundabout option, we're significantly improving that situation just because a roundabout inherently reduces the number of conflict points and really simplifies that complex geometry out there. For right-of-way impacts, there are moderate impacts with the roundabout to the edge of the village green and to the parcel to the southeast. In terms of utility impacts, again, moderate impacts with the roundabout, minor impacts with the other two alternatives. And then in terms of constructability, we're sort of from alternative 1, 2, and 3, going from really a minor effort up to a major, reconstruction effort in the downtown. So certainly something to be thinking about when we weigh these options. And then finally, for archaeological and historic and hazardous materials, there are potential impacts with the roundabout. Again, we're into the edge of that village green, which does have historic and archaeological sensitivity. So we're just acknowledging that. I don't think that we're having a huge impact there. We're really just talking about some sidewalk into the, new sidewalk into the village green there, but just something to be on our radar. And then in terms of aesthetics and satisfying the purpose and needs, it certainly, improves the aesthetic character of the downtown and satisfies the purpose and needs. And so just to give you a sense, we will go through that process in detail sort of internally for all of the alternatives we'll see this evening. But again, I just wanted to sort of show you the types of metrics we're looking at when we're looking at all of these alternatives, and take you through, the one that seemed most prudent, but we will forge ahead without having to dive into all this much detail on the other alternatives going forward.
Karen, would you mind flashing the 3 alternatives quickly for just to remind folks what they were?
Absolutely. And so again, here with alternative 1, we're really just updating the curb line, so drawing in some of the curbs, but not making any major changes to the geometry or to the intersection itself. Sort of what you see out there today with some minor improvements. Alternative 2, we're really tightening up that intersection geometry and changing things up a little bit more. So drawing those curves further in, sort of drawing in the Canada Street intersection with Grand Ave and Merchants Row, and then making that 5th leg of the intersection more of a one-way entrance point beyond the intersection. And then finally, the roundabout alternative. So really fully reconstructing this intersection with a roundabout.
And another question came up, Karen, and I believe I know the answer. You will be discussing parking impacts when you get into the side issues. Right now, you're just talking about the intersection operations itself, and you'll discuss the impacts in each area regarding parking as we get there.
Yep, that's correct. Yeah, we'll sort of bounce around that same image going forward here. So stay tuned. Anything else coming up, Jen?
The same question about parking spaces. It looks like we're getting a little bit of feedback between the few, so I will bank that till later, and we'll bring that up when we get into it.
Okay. All right, so shifting our focus over to that Merchants Row area, and I anticipate this is where folks are thinking about impacts to parking, so we'll forge ahead here. So again, shifting our focus to the far left, same image, but really honing in on what's happening in that Merchants Row area. So in this alternative 1, we're really proposing a one-way circulation through that area. So one way in, so you'd sort of operate southbound, one way out towards Canada Street, and then there would be 2-way access to and from Church Street. So we'd maintain that 2-way access, but for the rest of the area, it would be one way, and that's really to maximize the parking that's available while still, creating sort of a hardscape with curbing and or a green space there. So really delineating that area, but trying to maximize the parking that's available by limiting the circulation width to that one-way circulation. This option, as it's shown here, is the one option where we kept the alleyway open that sort of splits the buildings in Merchants Row there. We I'm not sure if that's something that we can pursue or not, whether to close that, but the other two options do show that closed, just to give us a sense of what that means in terms of extra parking spaces. So that's certainly something to weigh here. One of the trade-offs that we should be discussing towards the end of the evening, certainly, is whether or not to keep that open. And one of the features that you're going to see across all of these alternatives is pulling the sidewalk out in front of that frontage. So in all three alternatives that we're going to be looking at here, we really heard that come through from the local concerns meeting, that it'd be great to have some sidewalk frontage in front of the Merchants Row area, and not just sort of under the awning that's in front of those retail spaces. So you see that in each of the options that we're going to show here. The other thing that's
before you move on, would you mind using your pointer to illustrate where the one-way flow is and what direction it goes in that you referred to in the parking area?
Sure. Can you see my cursor?
I cannot.
I wonder if I do it over here. Can you see this?
Yes, got it.
All right. My apologies, I have to turn away from you to another screen, but so yes, one way would be in sort of southbound here, out towards Canada Street, and you can see the angled parking sort of makes that a little more intuitive. You'd pull in and be able to pull nose into these parking spaces along here, and same with this area, so nose into these parking spaces here. And then these 90-degree angle spaces would allow for folks that are using this two-way access from Church Street to get in and out of those spaces. So really trying to maximize the parking available while still, formalizing this area here that is currently the striped area in the parking area.
Karen, have you given some thought to how folks would access between the two sidewalk levels? There's a question about how that elevation would look.
Yeah, so certainly having a 5-foot sidewalk in front of that area as it exists today would give you another 8 inches of reveal. So I think there are sections where that would basically be flush with what's out there today, sort of 8 inches above where the parking and pavement is. Those areas that have sort of 1 or a half step left above the pavement versus some of those areas do have 2 steps. So I think it would provide more access and more opportunity to do some ramping in appropriate locations to get folks up to that level. And be flush in some areas, but again, would have a grade separation in others.
And if you were traveling from Canada Street and wanted to access Merchants Row, which way would you go? Would you have 2 options to pull into Merchants Row?
As this is shown, it would either be to make a right onto Merchants Row and then make that hard left into the one-way, or make a left and go all the way around the Village Green through Church Street.
Betsy just asked, would you mind with your cursor just showing that option for how you would do that? But Betsy, I believe you understood by your question, but I'll have Karen still show it.
So coming along Merchants Row here, and then either making this entry here through the one-way operation, or again making this left and traveling, to the south of the screen, and then back around on Church Street. So sort of going all the way around the Village Green.
Great, thank you. I think that's it as far as questions are concerned at this point.
Alrighty. All right, so again, our focus is shifted to the left-hand side of the screen here. we're seeing again that sidewalk along the frontage, so that 5-foot sidewalk and more opportunity to ramp and get folks into those retail spaces. In this option, we're showing the alleyway closed, which again is sort of an opportunity to maximize the parking. But in this option, we're really proposing a two-way circulation. So maintaining that width to allow for more vehicles to operate in either direction through here. And that's coupled with that 90-degree parking in most cases, with the exception of the parking along the northern edge of the village green there, which would be angle in. So folks sort of coming from the Merchants Row frontage towards Canada Street would be able to access that parking. And circulation. The other thing that stands out in each of these that may not be obvious to us just looking at this aerial, but this really does provide a lot more pedestrian access to the area. So that was one of the things that really came through in the local concerns meeting, was that particularly this sort of parking island out here for pedestrians is pretty inaccessible, and so this is really formalizing that access at multiple points to be able to get folks in here and be able to access that parking, and maybe not be contending with high-speed traffic, which is one of the things that we were hearing in the local concerns meeting. Again, we're trying to minimize impact and maximize parking through this option. So that's what you're seeing there.
Karen?
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit, I think it's this way along the whole, on all three alternatives, the green space in front of what is the laundromat and Scampers at the north end? I assume that's green space because that is often used as a loading dock. And I know we had talked about the safety concerns of that, but can you mention that? And unless I'm wrong and that's not green space, but.
Yeah, so, and that actually is a good point, Elizabeth. So thank you for bringing that up. The green space that's shown on all of these options really could be green space, could be hardscape. But the idea is really that those areas are curbed areas that aren't sidewalk. That's shown in sort of that off-white color there. So it could be hardscape, but really the concern here and the reason that we're sort of occupying a lot of this space with a curbed area is, if folks currently are coming in here and turning into these parking spaces, or driving through the area that is currently striped through there, it is pretty close in proximity to this through traffic and through movement, and if you're pulling out of the last space currently, you could be putting your tail right into the through movement along Merchants Row there. So we're sort of creating a space for at least a vehicle length to be able to make those movements appropriately without sort of endangering anyone. And again, an opportunity for like hardscape and potentially benches or tables or other opportunities for sort of streetscape elements in those areas that are again denoted here as green, but could be pavers or something else in terms of the treatment. Anything else coming up on this one?
Karen, I think we did have one similar, another similar question about the circulation into and out of Merchants Row. Will folks in this alternative be able to travel from Canada across into the parking? Will all of the parking at Merchants Row be two-way in this alternative, or will they still need to proceed to the south, take a right to come up Church, or go towards the river and take a left to come back?
Sure. So in this case, we are narrowing this, but this is still intended to be two-way operation. So and drawing in the Canada Street approach to this intersection really gives us the opportunity for folks to really almost square up with the opposing approach here, so, or the opposing leg of the intersection. So folks could be making this movement across the through movements on Merchants Row and Grand Avenue when there's an available gap, and coming right into this area, which again is intended to be two-way operation.
Is it possible to align it even better with, can Canada Street shift to be aligned even better? I would think that there is that possibility if this is the recommended alternative to probably tweak that design a bit.
Yeah, and I think, again, we're balancing here, trying to maximize the number of parking spaces, and also still accommodate, large vehicles through here. So this through movement and the edges of the curve are really dictated by still being able to accommodate the truck traffic through here. So making sure those heavy vehicles can still make this through movement, and the turning movements onto and off of Canada Street is really what's dictating a lot of the geometry here. But certainly if this is something that's going forward, we could be looking at that in more detail to really try to square that up.
And as a reminder to the group, because I've now gotten a number of comments, we aren't looking at Canada Street at all. That will be described in another section in a moment. Right now, it really is just the circulation alternatives at Merchants Row. If it wasn't clear to you from the beginning, we've really set this up so that it's kind of an a la carte menu, that you might like alternative 2 for Canada Street, but you might like alternative 3 for Merchants Row, or alternative 1 for the intersection itself. And the pieces can be fit together in a number of different ways. We've gotten a lot of comments so right now on Canada Street, so we'll table those until we get into the Canada Street discussion in a moment.
We are almost there. That's on deck. So, and thank you, Jen. That is a good point. This is really a method of mixing and matching. So, what works in alternative 2 for Merchants Row, for you may be coupled with what works in alternative 3 for Grand Avenue, and that may be okay. We may be able to make that work. So it is sort of a menu of options, which is why we're sort of bouncing around the downtown area to look at all of them individually. Okay, so I think we will forge ahead here to alternative 3. So again, bringing up that roundabout option. This one is a little more coupled with the roundabout option because it really is trying to, given the sort of geometry that the roundabout dictates, trying to, again, maximize the parking to fit with all that geometry, and also potentially giving us some other opportunities here. So I note on here, a green space or a hardscape opportunity here, where we're delineating that parking area between the roundabout and Merchants Row. This is intended again to be two-way circulation, and maintain a one-way access to the roundabout from the Merchants Row area, but through here is intended to be two-way operation.
Karen, I know this question came up before. What is the impact of parking here, about either percentage-wise or number of spaces? What do we think we're going to lose with this alternative?
I did do a count, so let me just double check. So it's a little over 2/3 retaining parking here. So I think there's 35 spaces out there today, and this is, I think we're down to 22 in this instance. So, and we don't have marked here any handicap parking yet, so that does take up a little more space. But what we're showing here is, typical 9-foot width spaces. So, handicap accessible parking aside at the moment, it's about 2/3 retention of parking for for this area with that option.
In this alternative, how would a cyclist travel? Because we've already discussed that they would not be going through the roundabout. So where do you see the cyclist traveling?
That's a really good question. And I think we'll get into that in a little more detail later on in the evening. I think what we're proposing, at least at the moment, is with alternative 3, with the roundabout option, to really get that channelization for the vehicles and get folks to slow down. We're talking about potentially moving the bikes to Church Street, and we'll show a cross section of that a little later on. But then, you know, we would have to, if that was the option that folks really were supporting, we would have to think through how we would want bikes to circulate through this this Merchants Row area. And one of the things that I've been thinking about, and we sort of have to see where we land with the a la carte options and how they all fit together, but something like a shared street, or even, you know, a different surface treatment through that area to make it more of like a mixing zone, so that you know, everyone's sort of using that space for, you know, slow operation for vehicles, parking, and, you know, mixing bike traffic and pedestrians. So that could be an option, but we'd have to think through that a little more carefully through that Merchants Row area to make that connection.
For the confident cyclist, however, they could just travel with traffic through the roundabout.
Absolutely. And we are showing wide sidewalks here, but another option is to widen those sidewalks even more so. We're showing with the roundabout option, we're showing a pretty generous green belt and extra wide sidewalks. So, you know, that is another option to be thinking about, is sort of widening out those sidewalks to the point that you could sort of have a shared path in some locations.
Can you use your cursor just to illustrate where bikes might travel in this alternative?
So as a confident cyclist, you would most likely just take the lane. So if you were coming from Grand Avenue, you would take the lane as a vehicle operating through the roundabout. And then as a less bold cyclist, we're proposing that Church Street be more of like a slow street with bike lanes on both sides and really narrow travel lanes. So it really is sort of that shared space. And then again, what I was just speaking to was sort of thinking more clearly, if that is the option we want going forward, thinking through how we would circulate bikes through this Merchants Row area to then make connections to proposed bike lanes going to the north here.
It is time to get to Canada Street, because that is all that I'm getting comments about.
All right, we will bounce over to Canada Street. So again, same image on your screen, but shifting our focus to the right-hand side of this image. So in alternative 1, what we're proposing and sort of the features that are the main attraction here, we're talking about extending the sidewalk. So currently, I think the sidewalk is somewhere in the range of 8.5 feet wide. We're proposing a 15-foot width here, so really maximizing that space in front of those retail locations. Again, you know, mimicking what's out there today with the angled nose-in parking. So, you know, maximizing the parking area through here with that angled parking, and, you know, it's sort of sister mini angled parking area to the right here. Sorry, I keep using the cursor on this screen when I'm looking at you, and I should be using the cursor on this screen. My apologies. So angled in parking on this side. Pulling this curb in and really implementing some access management on this parcel in the southeast quadrant here. So, you know, closing off one of the driveways here and pulling that curb in. And then in this case, we're showing shared lanes for bike circulation. And really the reason for that is because we're showing this angled in parking, and we're a little more limited if we draw this curb line out in terms of width. And with the angled in parking, we really don't want to mix the the nose in parking with a bike lane adjacent to it. So we're a little bit limited in that regard in terms of trying to maximize the parking and accommodate bikes and implement some access management. So again, we're looking at those couple of trade-offs. So in this case, we're really maximizing the opportunity in front of these retail locations with an extended sidewalk. Nose trade-off for that is shared with bikes and traffic. And I think I'll jump to the other alternative, and then maybe we can talk through what questions arise from the two.
Before you do, I did just have a clarifying question that on alternative 1 as shown here, the access into ACE is two-way.
Yes, on both of those driveways, the access is two-way. So this very much mimics what is out there today.
Right, alternative 1 is the closest to existing from the alternatives.
Yep.
Go ahead, that was the only question. Again, I've gotten some feedback, but that was the only question.
And then with alternative 2, again, shifting our focus right here to Canada Street, what we're showing here is, again, implementing that access management, extending the curb lines. We're not extending the sidewalk beyond what it is today. So it is an extra wide sidewalk in front of those retail locations, but we're not sort of doubling it like we are in the other option. And then what we're showing for the parking coupled with those bike lanes, so bike lanes in both directions in this case, we're showing angled back in parking. And that's really just to better accommodate the sort of mixing of bike lanes adjacent to angled parking. So we're maximizing the number of parking spaces we can fit by having that angled parking, but implementing that back in parking so that folks, when they get back in their vehicle and they go to pull out, they can see the cyclist in the bike lane instead of backing into them in the bike lane, because it's really tough to see cyclists when you have that nose-in style parking in a bike lane right behind you. So that's sort of the best practice for coupling those two features, and so that's what we're showing in this option here.
Is there a way to lessen the bump out in front of the theater building and keep the ACE entrance two-way?
Yeah.
I think my response to that is that's kind of almost two different questions, because the ACE entrance is connected to the intersection. And so that is an alternative to include a two-way access there. It does reduce the size of that island. There is definitely an alternative that accommodates that as far as the intersections are concerned. So if there is consensus around alternative 2, but a desire to keep the ACE driveway two-way, that certainly is something that can be accommodated.
Definitely. And I guess the other thing that I'll again sort of note here is that, we're showing this as green space, but this certainly could be hardscape, and again, some additional opportunities for other streetscape features, for those retail locations or for the downtown, for the community to leverage. So sort of creating space where currently there's a good amount of pavement, and creating that sort of vertical delineation to have an opportunity to do something different with that area potentially.
Another question about the ACE driveway was, could that entrance be eliminated to allow for more parking and just have their access be the two-way between the bank and the parts store to make it less dangerous at this intersection. And I think what you see here is our attempt to reduce the conflicts at this intersection, but not eliminate what is a private access driveway. You know, you cannot take away someone's access rights unless, you know, they want to give them up. So in this case, although we've eliminated some of those conflicts, we haven't actually taken away a full access.
Definitely. Anything else that's coming up? So there's really only those two options for Canada Street that we're showing here. So any other clarifying questions or things that we want to clear up before we?
Well, there is alternative 3 that you showed on the roundabout, which has got so much comment. Is it with the roundabout alternative, you were illustrating how you would handle parking on this leg. And there was a lot of stress about that because of the number of parking spaces that would be taken away. So I don't know if you want to just flip back to that to just show that piece, because it certainly was something folks were asking about, is that how Canada Street is handled here.
Definitely. So with the roundabout, the effect that you really want to have is to channelize the traffic so that they do sort of slow the rate of speed prior to getting to the actual roundabout. So, you know, that's why we keep these at least 50-foot long, if not longer, splitter islands to sort of give folks that feeling of getting squeezed, so they reduce their speed before they then have to, you know, make a turn around the roundabout. And so the best way to sort of mimic that in this case and still allow people to get back into that channel before reaching the edge of the roundabout was through this option. I have seen some other methods implemented. This isn't the only option out there. This just really was a good option, and frankly one we borrowed from the top of the circulator in Winooski, where again, you know, they have this sort of channelizing effect and wanted to maintain that, but still have the opportunity to sort of maximize the parking that they could.
So how many parking spaces would be lost on Canada Street as a result of this one, Karen?
5 there. And
Okay. That looks about right.
So,
and to clarify, the brown is illustrated as sidewalk in these concepts. Someone did ask that question.
yeah. Some of them are proposed new sidewalks, some of them are existing sidewalk that we're sort of tying into.
A quick question about trucks driving over the sidewalk. I think in any of these alternatives, they would be built with new granite curbing that would provide a stronger impediment to trucks because of their severe, 90-degree angle and sharpness of the corner. So it would hopefully help eliminate some of your concern there. One question we had is whether you know of an example where back-in parking is working successfully, because they aren't familiar with it.
That is a really good question. I don't know of an example in Vermont, but it is certainly, there are lots of case studies out there. It is the preferred, like I said, it is the preferred sort of coupling with a bike lane adjacent to angled parking. It's definitely the preferred approach to, again, sort of provide that safe bike lane operation. And so I would have to look into a good example. I'm not sure that there's a good example in Vermont that folks might be able to get familiar with.
And yeah, so one of the questions is could we switch that to angle in or straight in? And I think the response is, if you want to safely provide access for bikes in a bike lane there, you really cannot have angled parking like it is currently, because the driver cannot see the cyclist and has run them over before they even see them. So it is not, a recommended alternative with an adjacent bike lane.
Anything else before we move forward?
There was a question about whether bike lanes are necessary on Canada Street on both sides, or if one side is sufficient, which is certainly, there is, depending on the feedback, there is that option to get, to decide that in one direction is more important to the community to have a bike lane, and that the other lane, a shared street, might be an alternative. But let's wait till we get into the discussion portion before we get into that. But it certainly, I wanted to answer that is something that could be discussed. I think, hold on. There was a question of, could you put the bike lane between the sidewalk and the parking? It's a great question.
Very good question. I don't.
We would have to be careful about how we treat it at the intersections, and maybe give a little more thought to how they would cross what would be then sidewalks crossing with bikes. But it's certainly, that is a worthwhile, and there's a number of places, there are a number of examples in, everywhere basically, where parking moves out so that the cyclist can be closer to the curb. I mean, that certainly is an option cycles move in, parking moves out so cyclists can be along the curb.
Yeah, and given the sort of ample width that we have to work with here, with removing that left turn lane, along that area, with maybe a trade-off of a little bit of that extra width that we're seeing in that sidewalk.
Mm-hmm. There's also the question if a bike lane can be located in the middle of the road. And I would just answer that although there are some locations where they do it like a two-way cycle track in the middle of the road, that requires a lot more accommodation at intersections to how to process them, and works better at a signalized intersection when you can control everyone. It is certainly something that can be considered in some situations, but with the number of movements happening at these intersections, I think it would be difficult here. There's also a question about whether curbing is going to be along that sidewalk on Merchants Road to make sure cars don't drive right up onto the walkway. And yes, in every location that we are considering, there would be a hard curb line.
Yeah, maybe that's just worth noting, any of these areas that have, green right up against the edge of the pavement, or our sidewalk right up against the edge of the pavement, that the assumption there is that those are curbed areas. They have, 8-inch reveal from the pavement level up to sidewalk or green space or hardscape.
All right, I think that's it besides comments, which obviously we'll get into later.
Great. All right, so moving on to Grand Avenue and Church Street. So really what we're focused on here is sort of a slightly different look than what we were looking at in the last couple of focus areas. So here we're really focused on Grand Avenue, but when we were thinking through the options for Grand Avenue, we really felt like making some recommendations about what we might couple with that alternative on Church Street to get a desired bike circulation, is really sort of the impetus for these cross sections that you're seeing at the bottom of the screen. So in the top right corner, we're seeing alternative 1 for Grand Avenue in plan view here, and then at the bottom of the screen, we're seeing a cross section of what we're proposing for Church Street. And then, you see the village green space in between, and then what we're proposing in cross section for Grand Avenue that is coupled with that plan view that you're seeing in the top right corner. So for alternative one, really the features to note are that we're proposing here parking on one side of Grand Avenue. In this case, parking that's convenient to the amenities that are on the eastern edge there. And we're also proposing pedestrian bulb outs at crosswalks. So again, trying to limit the exposure of pedestrians and really minimize the crossing length that they have to get over to the Village Green. And in terms of bike circulation, here we're proposing bike lanes on Grand Avenue. So in this cross section that you're seeing at the bottom of the screen, sorry, I keep using my cursor on the wrong screen for folks to be following along. So in this area, in the cross section of Grand Avenue, you're seeing two-way bike operation on Grand Avenue. So we're basically eliminating one side of the parking to then accommodate two-way bike traffic on Grand Avenue. So we're sort of trading that parking lane for two bike lanes in this case. And then, ample width travel lanes to, again, accommodate that heavier truck traffic that comes through here. And maintaining a parking lane on one side. And with that, we would propose coupling on Church Street, really, maximizing and formalizing the parking on Church Street, and then, narrower travel lanes for that two-way vehicular operation, but really no formalized bike accommodations on Church Street in this alternative.
So Karen, with this alternative, you would be eliminating some parking on Grand Avenue, but proposing to replace it by really formalizing the curb space on Church Street.
That's correct. And it doesn't necessarily need to be this particular cross section, but this is one of the proposals for cross section for Church Street. I could see potentially necking down any of that green belt and trying to formalize even more parking along that stretch if need be. Anything else on that one before we move forward?
Right now, it's just feedback.
Okay, we're going to see sort of this same framing in a couple of different slices here, so bear with me. Okay, so similar framework here for alternative 2. In plan view, we're seeing alternative 2 in the top right hand corner, and then again the cross sections for Grand Avenue and for Church Street. And with this option, what we're proposing really is to create a bike circulation on either side of the Village Green. So in this case, we have the northbound cyclist going along Grand Avenue, so from First Street or south of First Street, really, north up towards Canada Street and Merchants Row, and then the southbound cyclist using the other side of the Village Green and heading southbound on Church Street. So it's really splitting up that formalized bike accommodation half and half, sort of half on Grand Avenue and half on Church Street, and then being able to fit in a little more on both sides. So really formalizing that parking and sort of thinking through the circulation a little bit differently. Some of the other features to note here, again, pedestrian bulb outs at the crosswalks, that bike circulation. And then the other thing to note here, we are showing an option of the First Street intersection being an all-way stop. We did check the warrants for the First Street and Grand Avenue intersection, and an all-way stop is warranted for this location. So, we did want to show, one slice of that at least. So that's what you're seeing in plan view there is one option for formalizing an all-way stop at that location.
Karen, is there any loss of the village green with these alternatives, or can 1 and 2 both be accommodated within the available width?
This is all limiting any impact on the village green. So this is staying within the current curbed area. And I guess the one thing to note, I don't think it's in this option. I think it's in the next option where we're talking about borrowing a foot of space either from the existing sidewalk width, which is a generous sidewalk width. I think it's currently 8 feet there, or a foot from the village green. So I think that's in the next option now. Anything else on this one before we click ahead? I guess the one thing I will note, I'm noticing in the cross section, that buffer area that we're showing next to the bike lane, the northbound bike lane, is really just a door zone. So that is a nice feature. In alternative 1, we're really squeezing in 2 bike lanes and generous travel lanes for those larger vehicles and a parking lane, and at the risk of having someone open the door of their car as they're getting out from the parking spot and hitting a cyclist going by. So a buffer here is really a door zone so that doesn't occur. So we're using that little bit of extra width to create, again, a safer accommodation for the bicyclists here. And then with alternative 3, again, this is coupled with the roundabout option. So we want to keep that in mind in terms of the sort of a la carte menu. We certainly wouldn't be trying to channelize folks so much if we weren't thinking about implementing the roundabout. So in this area, we would be able to maximize the parallel parking and probably match what's out there today, if not do a little better with some access management in this parcel up here. So this alternative 3 is really, parking on both sides of Grand Avenue as it is today. We are just showing it coupled with this roundabout option. So we lose some of the parking with the roundabout option. But, not to say that we can't regain that with a different option if this is the way folks want to go. Again, we're implementing those pedestrian bulb outs so that we're shortening the distance that folks need to cross that traffic, and particularly in this area, that heavier traffic flow and high percentage of heavy vehicles. And then in this option, we're thinking through really putting the bike circulation on Church Street. So making Church Street really the shared space, the sort of slow flow zone, mixing with bikes, and making Grand Avenue really focused on the vehicular operation. So moving vehicles on Grand Avenue, moving sort of more localized traffic and bikes on Church Street. So that's what you're seeing in the cross sections here for that.
So for clarification, Karen, if this wasn't coupled with the roundabout, would this be at least the same amount of parking similar to what the parking is provided out there today?
Yes, at least that. If not, I think we gain 1 or maybe even 2 spaces with some access management on that parcel on the corner.
Okay.
Great. And the last piece here, so for Merchants Row towards Marble Mill Park, we really just wanted to show what we had coupled with each of the alternatives, and talk through a couple of the opportunities and impacts that are happening here. So
now we are looking at north of the village, Merchants Row parking areas to the right on your screen, and heading north out of town, because I think the reorientation is going to throw a few people.
yes, thank you. Trying to get this to show side by side that reorientation was necessary, but I appreciate the plug there for. So if you are, I keep putting my screen on the wrong, or my cursor on the wrong screen, so I think you can see what I'm doing. If you're thinking about this location here, this is the entrance to Marble Mill Park, and then where my cursor is basically where the start of the bridge crossing would begin, at the bottom of the hill there. So just to give you another landmark. So a couple of things that we're thinking through here for both alternative 1 and alternative 2, we're showing bike lanes connecting up to the Merchants Row area and the intersection with Grand Avenue and Canada Street. So in both of those options, we are showing bike lanes on either side. In order to accommodate the width needed for that, we really would have some impacts here sort of shown at the top of the screen, some impacts to the right of way right up here, in order to be able to push the sidewalk out enough to accommodate the width we need for the travel lanes, particularly the truck movements through that area, and a bike lane. So that's really the pinch point that we were thinking through. So there would be some impacts right away, minimal, but still some impacts right away in this area up here in both alternative 1 and alternative 2. And in both of these options, we're also proposing to relocate the crossing that exists out there today. So you can sort of faintly see in both of these options the existing crosswalk, which we're proposing to move up when we formalize that Merchants Row area and gain that curbed space that is outside the laundromat that is currently striped, giving some pedestrian refuge there, and then creating a crossing up sort of away from the corner of the building from where it's located today. So in both alternative 1 and alternative 2, we'd be relocating that crossing. And then in alternative 2, in addition to that, we're showing this bike lane coming up through here. We do have the width if we needed it to continue it up, but we were thinking through, in alternative 2, that's the alternative where we'd have southbound cyclists on Church Street. So maybe thinking through the connection of that bike lane to the southbound bike lane on Church Street. So that's what you're seeing there. And then finally, just thinking through, I know at the local concerns meeting, there was what came through was some of the opportunities along the corridor, and one of them is that Marble Mill Park area. So in alternative 1, we're just showing a crossing and a little more formalization of that entryway, narrowing that driveway to gain a little bit of a bulb out here so that we can have a safe crossing at that location between Marble Mill Park on one side and then Marble Mill Park and River Lane on the other side. And so thinking through that and just showing a potential entry point here. I know that there has been some effort to sort of revitalize that area, and I'm not exactly sure where that planning effort stands, but we'd want to sort of think through aligning with that if we were going forward with something like that. And then with alternative 3, I just wanted to show it as sort of the the contrast to what we're showing in alternative 1 and alternative 2. Alternative 3, again, we're coupling it with the roundabout, but it doesn't necessarily need to be with the roundabout. It's actually pretty close to what's out there today. So the crosswalks in the same location as it is today. We're showing the edges of the existing sidewalk as it is today. So it's very close to the no build condition, just to show the no build condition in contrast with what we're showing for alternative 1 and alternative 2 here.
We did receive a comment, Karen, that the Chamber of Commerce building isn't showing correctly on our aerial, and I think that's fine. And if we need to, just to verify that we have right of way in that area, we obviously can take a look at that. Thank you for alerting us to it.
Are we talking about the building that was relocated? Yeah. Okay. This does not, the right-of-way impacts here would not bump up against that structure. So I have verified that. I do have that specific location thanks to some site plans that were provided. So I did double check that and make sure that we steered clear of that structure.
Okay. If a cyclist wanted to get to an alternative 2, if a cyclist wanted to get from the park to First Street, do they have to go all the way south and around the village to do that and come back up?
That's a good question and something I was thinking through. So what I would propose in that case, because we are sort of designating the Church Street area as the southbound cyclist movement, but we do have the Village Green available to us adjacent to that. I think sort of thinking of the Village Green as a good connector to something like First Street, and maybe thinking through even formalizing some connections there, but there are already some connections. So maybe just thinking about connecting whatever we're proposing for bike lanes to the Village Green to be able to make those broader, more regional connections to other areas of the downtown and beyond. And I guess I'll say that the idea for that sort of split northbound, southbound cyclist circulation was born out of the local concerns meeting, when we were really hearing from folks that they wanted bicycle accommodations and wanted connections both to points north of the project area. So thinking through future connections to Maquam Shore and some of the other areas that are under development, and also to the south to bike lanes that are on Grand Avenue south of the project area, and connecting to the LVRT. So really thinking through how do we pull folks, if they are on the LVRT, to the downtown and vice versa, making that sort of a fluid access. So we definitely were hearing that through the local concerns, and I think that northbound, southbound split circulation was one of the more innovative solutions to getting folks sort of further north and south from our project area.
One question on what's on the screen, Karen, is from the Marble Mill Park. Were you expecting there to be stop signs there where you show a crosswalk, or is it just the park itself that has a stop sign?
As we're showing it, it's just the park itself that has a stop sign. So it would be a two-way stop, not a four-way stop in this case. think that's it on that.
Yep. Great. All right. No other questions.
Alrighty.
So for our public input section, I think what I'll probably do is I'll start by reading what I have pulled out of the chat and in the Q&A panel that was more commentary to start. And then once I am done, if someone wants to raise a new topic or further an idea that's already been brought out or has a position, Karen, perhaps be ready. We'll start with the intersection section. So we might have a question, or someone might want to relook at the alternatives to remind themselves, because we have gone over a lot of material tonight. So there's the question regarding the intersection. The feedback is alternative one is the most sensible of the options. In alternative one, you can add pedestrian crosswalk light. Oh, could we add a pedestrian crosswalk light as First Street has? Alternative two, it makes people have to cross traffic to park. This is a busy space on Saturday. In alternative three, there's the concern regarding the lack of parking, which would be a significant impact on the businesses, and then a concern that it would impact the memorial in the park. As a local business owner, alternative one is favorable, and against alternative, this person is against alternative three. The other was the concern of no left turn lane at the end of Canada in design 1 and 2. There's the concern with increased traffic. I think this is a misinterpretation. This doesn't mean you cannot take a left turn from Canada Street. You can, it just isn't in a separate lane. Because I think the concern was then people would be cutting through a neighborhood in this particular comment. Any other feedback or questions or comments on the intersection alternatives? And I know obviously the areas overlap, so I know some of the comments will extend into the other areas, but let's try to, as much as we can, keep our comments to the intersection alternatives. If you would raise your hand, my colleague Tommy will call on you and allow you to unmute your mic and provide some comment. We have an anonymous attendee in the question and answer who has indicated their support for alternative 3, despite the expense. After that, they like alternative 1. So that's another piece of feedback we've received. But Tommy, I'll let you take it from here.
Great. So it looks like we've got 2 hands raised. So if any other folks would like to verbalize their comments or concerns, please feel free to use the raise hand button at the bottom of Zoom. And if you're dialing in, you can hit *9 on your touch tone. It looks like the first in line is Edward. So I'm going to send you a command, Edward, to allow you to unmute. Okay, Edward, you should be able to.
Oh, I guess I'm okay.
There we go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. When we were talking about the bicycle lanes at the end, there was one other item that I thought as I looked at Grand Avenue. We're going to put a restaurant out of business pretty quick with taking all the parking off from Grand Avenue. That's the only place you can get something to eat between St. Albans and Rouse's Point. They had a rough winter. They're coming back now. I noticed Sunday morning, they were filled through there. Friday mornings, they're filled now. We take out all that parking, we're putting them out of business. So I would suggest that we leave those parking spots there. Those are the 2 busiest businesses downtown, or will be shortly, is the post office and that restaurant.
So Edward,
so I would suggest the southbound bicycle lane, take it right up Church Street, across Farrar Street, then it's back on Route 7 to go south.
Mm-hmm.
You're coming north, you get up to the end of 2nd Street by Flatiron Park,
mm-hmm.
Veterans Park, whatever term you want to use. You take northbound, they turn there. Mm-hmm. 2 blocks, they're down on Canada Street.
Yep.
Canada Street, all they got to do is look around. It's not hard to tell where downtown is. They can go right, which takes them up Route 7 towards Canada. They can go left, brings them right downtown. they can continue to Rouse's Point. And that way, the restaurant, the post office, and people will be able to park to go to both those very important buildings.
Great.
And the other thought that I had is every time I go to move from there, I get nervous. Is when you're leaving the parking area north of the park and you head east up onto Canada Street, you don't know where the traffic is coming from. Right now, you have 2 lanes of traffic coming across, and everybody wants to go into this little parking area.
Mhm.
I
So
would think
Edward, which
maybe-
alternative do you support here at the intersection?
at that intersection, some way that you could not just cross Route 78 across that little thing. Somebody might have to use some one way around the park or something. I
Okay,
mean,
so
I
alternative 1, as it's shown, is one of those alternatives you'd be in support of that?
mean, when you're coming out of that little parking at the north end of the park, maybe that ought to be, without a roundabout, maybe that ought to be right-hand turn only.
Mhm.
Now, they might have to go around another block to get back there to go to Route 78, but at least we're gonna make it a little safer for them.
Okay,
I mean,
Thank you.
that little parking area there at the north end of the park right now, I mean, that's NASCAR North trying to come out of there. So that was
Right.
my thought on those 2 areas. And maybe if we have the little park in 2 or 3, I forgot which one you had the little park in little parking area there. Maybe that could enter, if there's no roundabout, maybe that could enter one-way Church Street back around that way or something. I mean, we're not asking people to move, go a big distance here to get out of there with a few one-way streets.
Mhm.
So those are my first few thoughts on it.
great. Thank you for your input. I have a little bit more coming up in the chat. Adam prefers alternative 2. David Winchester agrees with Ed's points that option 3 caused problems to the downtown by eliminating parking. So this is speaking to the Grand Avenue alternatives in that particular case.
Okay, and Jen, it looks like we've got a couple more hands raised in the order that they were raised. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to the Swanton Village Manager. Should be able to unmute at this time.
Okay, thank you. I guess there's a couple of questions. Chris Leach, Village Trustee, has a question.
Chris Leach, I've been somewhat involved in this from day one and have lived in Swanton all my life, or not all my life, but many years here. But I'm a little concerned that we didn't address one of the biggest pieces that my constituents hit me with all the time, and that's the turn from First Street onto Grand Avenue. That's a 90-degree turn for those 54-foot trucks. And also, I think I remember at a couple of these meetings saying, I know this would be extremely unpopular, but I would really like to see it at least presented, is to bisect the park with a coming up the hill from the river, turning left onto First Street, a nice wide normal street with normal turns, and then see how everything else around it could be configured to be, extremely conducive to parking and to business access, all the pieces that we're talking about, as well as bicycles and everything else. It seems to me that there probably is an alternative, at least something that ought to be looked at. Maybe it wouldn't be popular and we wouldn't do it, but is to bisect the park, make a real smooth, easy turn up onto First Street, because the state has told us that we're never going to have a bypass around the village for the trucks. And there are literally hundreds, and I mean it, hundreds of multi-axle trucks, some going east, some going west, that pass through the village. And I was hoping that, unless somebody is cast in concrete that you can't touch the village green, at least we could see a plan that showed a good traffic flow, a safe traffic flow, and how all the other concerns, business access, safety, bicycles, everything else could work around that.
Anybody else had any questions on that while we have the floor?
Yes, I had the one question.
Okay, Eugene LeBombard, trustee.
Thank you.
Canada Street and Grand Avenue are US Route 7. You don't have a left-hand turn at the junction of Canada, and I guess that's, I don't know, that's Grand Avenue, I guess.
Yes.
How in the world is someone supposed to get, if they're traveling south on Route 7, how are they going to get beyond the village?
Again,
You
I
have no
apologize if. Go ahead.
You have no left turn there.
You have no left turn lane there. I apologize, we weren't clear about that. We took a look at whether the left turn lane was necessary. Now, people will back up a little further at that stop sign or
see.
yield sign.
So
But-
it's not, so you would allow a left-hand turn.
We would allow a left turn. It is not being prohibited. And I apologize that that was not clear.
Okay, fine. Thank you. And
You're welcome.
And I
If I,
agree- I agree with the other guys about the parking in front of the post office and the restaurant.
yeah,
Man,
let me
there's a lot of-
clarify a couple of things. As far as the parking, Karen, can you go to alternative 3 on Grand Avenue? We wanted to show, a continuous alternative, and that's what alternative 3 was. But it's important for me to point out, alternative 3 actually is the alternative as a whole for Grand Avenue that keeps all the parking. So if you look from that middle crosswalk to the right, you'll see that there's the parking that, as it currently exists, provided. If we do not go with a roundabout alternative, the parking on both sides of the street continues all the way up to the intersection.
I
So
understand.
alternative 3, it only becomes a loss of parking when it is coupled with a roundabout. So you have to remember to take these pieces apart and look at the bottom of the screen. If you look at the bottom of the screen here, you can see that Grand Avenue will have 2 driving lanes and 2 parking lanes, similar to existing, and the cyclist would be shifted over to Church Street. So as a result, there's very little loss of parking spaces here. There might be, we might remove one for sight distance or something, but in general, it's very consistent with what's out there currently. So I just wanted to call your attention to that clarifying.
Thank you.
So you could be against at the intersection having a roundabout, but still be in support of alternative 3 as it's laid out on Grand Avenue.
I understand.
Okay, great. Thank you. Because we've in between the chat and words, we've heard a little bit of concern with that. I did want to also address what was happening down at First and Grand. And Karen, actually, why don't you just indicate what we looked at and why we're very limited at that location as to what could be done because of the size of the large trucks at that intersection. Sorry to keep making you jump all around.
Not a problem. So with the First Street intersection, we still wanted to accommodate trucks, but we are really limited by potential impacts at this location. So, we've run the turning movements for those larger vehicles through this intersection, and we have run the numbers in terms of what's warranted at this location. And so, this location is always stop warranted. So we could have an always stop at this location. And what we're showing here in alternative 2 is just that. It's creating an always stop condition. So for every leg of this intersection, you would have a stop sign. But those trucks to make that turn off of First Street and onto Grand Avenue really utilize all the pavement width that is available to them through there. And so, you know, we were pretty limited in what we could do otherwise without, you know, blowing out structures adjacent and parcels adjacent to this location and having significant impacts to the village green. And I guess to just double back to Chris's comments and maybe just provide a little more insight, we did have an archaeological resources assessment and a historic resources assessment coupled with this effort. And so the results of those deeper dives into the historical and archaeological resources in this area, that bisector of the village green did used to exist many, many moons ago. But since then, because of the archaeological sensitivity and the sort of historic nature of the village green and its current condition, I think we would be hard pressed to get the permitting in place that we would need to do something that significant through there. Not saying that it couldn't happen, but you know, I think we're pretty bound by those results in this particular case.
If I may, there's a number of comments that had been put in the chat and the Q&A that have to do with kind of the other sections. And since we're kind of hopping around, I figure I should probably read through them all. What I would like to do, because I don't think everyone has had a chance to speak, and I don't know, Tommy will help me see if other people have hands raised once I read my comments. What I'd like to do, Karen, if you think this is a good idea, is very quickly maybe run through and have folks raise hands and we count them to see in each section what folks are feeling, just so that we kind of get an indication kind of on each piece of the village how folks are feeling. But let me read through these comments first. There was a comment on option 1 that we would need a signage in the Merchants Row area because of the modifications to one-way. Comment overall that it would be a good idea to put green space between the sidewalks and the traffic where we can, and it is true in places where we're creating larger islands. That's a great idea. That really enhances the pedestrian experience. The question about green areas, are we assuming that it will be like it is today, that it's just pavement, or will it be, and I think we've now since clarified that it will be raised curbs and, you know, grassed in places, sidewalk in others. Public access in option 2 is excellent, was a comment we received. Again, this is on the Merchants Row section. Is it possible to align Canada Street with Merchants Row Parking? I think I did hit on that. The roundabout bike option doesn't seem safe. A comment that roundabouts are challenging for tractor trailer drivers. That there would be a concern about compromising long-term integrity of the interior of the roundabout. On Canada Street, it is much better how the entrance of ACE angles more into the intersection. There's a little back and forth there as to how to handle that ACE intersection. I will just clarify with you that in the alternative where we showed it as a one-way entering, the reason we shifted it there was to really clean up so that it was only a 4-way intersection at the actual intersection and didn't have a 5th leg. And so it would be a conscious choice of a driver once through the intersection to turn into the ACE, just to clarify how that was expected to operate. Parking in front of the merchants are very important for those businesses. I think that was a reaction to alternative 3 and the concerns about the reduced parking with the roundabout on Canada Street. Due to conflicts with the 5-way intersection, what would be the rationale for keeping that ACE access as 2-way or directly out into the roundabout? And again, we wanted to provide a host of options and again reiterate that ACE does have a 2-way access point right here, and that we need to present alternatives that maintain every business person's access as we proceed through this process. Too much parking being lost with the roundabout. Alternative 2 is aesthetically pleasing, seems practical, and the parking is laid out well. Putting a bike lane between parking spaces and the sidewalk is a great idea. Let's see if I get cut something off here. Okay. Then once we got over to the Grand Ave Church, having bike lanes on Grand Ave is a nice idea because Grand Ave is the direct connection from the rec path and LVRT. We got the comment that someone likes that always stop at First and Grand Avenue. There was a question about, and I think this would impact again, what happened on the green would there be a way to soften the turn from First onto Grand? And because of the turning radius of the trucks, we would really need to take a good chunk of that park to be able to do that. It really would have you wouldn't have quite the village green that you have today if we were to make a more sweeping turn for the trucks to be able to make that maneuver. And then a comment that the chamber relocation creates a blind corner scenario, something we should be aware of. Let me just see if anything else has popped up since I like roundabouts, but the loss of parking spots on Grand in Canada is unacceptable for me. Concerned about the safety of the two-way parking lot entrance, the road sharing when turning out at the north end of the parking. It should be one way only at that point. Looks like, let me see, I missed a few here. Could the stop sign, southbound stop sign at First Grand be further up from the intersection to allow for truck turns onto Grand? Could we eliminate left-hand turns from First Street to Grand? That's something that we didn't really talk about, but because that's the end of our study area, that might be a little difficult for us to incorporate as a part of this study, but we certainly can consider that. Did we consider routing trucks down York Street and left onto Canada when coming west into the village on First Street? Elizabeth did handle that, and basically that does just move the challenge about those truck turns, because when those tractor trailer trucks make their turns, that would create two different locations that we were really going to impact similarly to what's happening at Grand and First. So thank you, Elizabeth, for having that discussion. And I think that's it for what we've received. Oh, was there an estimation of the quantity of truck traffic? Do you recall, Karen? I know we discussed it at the local concerns meeting. What percent? I feel like it was like
13%. I'm not Karen, but it's 13%.
13%. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Yeah, it's very heavy here. That's very high for a truck percentage. In the bike traffic.
16.
Sorry, what?
Was it? I thought for some reason I thought it was 16. This is Reggie. 16%.
I'm sure it depends when the count is done, because although recreation traffic rises and falls significantly, I bet your truck traffic stays pretty steady. So when recreation trips are down, I bet instead your truck percentage then is higher percentage of the total. So I bet that both numbers are probably correct depending on when the data was collected. And then as far as bike traffic, we did not do an estimation of the quantity of bike traffic, although VTrans traffic counts do include counts of bikes. I think the focus on providing the bike connections was more about all of these trails that you have that are coming into town and providing safe connections between them. Because what you really want is not me to just ride my bike on the LVRT. You want me to pop into town and get a soda or get a bite to eat or shop at your stores. So it's really, how do we get that economic development? How do we get more vibrancy to our downtown by providing these people who are recreating nearby the connections? So I don't think your bike traffic numbers were high. It was more, how do we encourage them to get higher? There was support for the idea of running southbound bike lanes on Church Street, give the bicyclists the opportunity to even ride through the park if they want, but keeps them off of Grand Avenue. Can I turn it back to Tommy? Do we have any other hands raised before we get to our kind of speed, what do you favor round?
Sure. It looks like we've got one more in the attendees. So Mark, I'm going to allow you to unmute and you should have the floor.
Hi, Mark.
Great presentation. Thank you for that. I'm in favor of number one.
Mhm.
I love the green space ideas in any of the locations. I think that's important. The wide sidewalks, that's certainly a plus, I think, for the future. I think for what the community is trying to do. The bike traffic, love the ideas, but I'm looking 5-10 years down the road to get people to come into the village and to stop. We really need parking. So that's where I'm looking at. The more parking spaces that we save now, the better. And I think it's up for us officials to look to the future to find even more places, but I'm in favor of number one.
Excellent. Anybody else, Tommy, with their hand raised, or should we go with with my quick survey?
All right. I don't believe I see any hands raised at this time, so I will turn it back over to you.
Great, because we are getting close to I think actually we're supposed to end at 8, but that's fine. The more input we get, we're happy to stay a little longer. What we'd like to do really quick is, oh, Gordon, did you have your hand raised before I move on?
Yes, it looks like.
I didn't, but Debbie did.
Hi, Debbie.
Oh, hi. So I guess I would just say that I think alternative one in the intersection seems very much like what's there now. So it doesn't seem like it would have the impact that we're looking to have. Alternative two, in my opinion, makes a huge difference. So I just wanted to, but except I think, if we could find a way to make the ACE entrance there two-way by reducing that bump out, I think it'd be perfect.
Was Gordon nudging you as you expressed your support for alternative two to say, what are you doing?
I know, he's like.
Just a little look, that's all.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Great. All right, so what's going to happen now is we're going to start from the beginning, and we are just talking about the intersections here. What is going to happen is Tommy is going to give you all visibility so that we'll all become equal participants so that I can count, or Karen can count, for raised hands. When I ask you to only raise your hand for the alternative you like the most in the area I'm asking you. So even if you hate the way the parking looks on Canada Street, if I'm asking about the intersection, please only state what your opinion is regarding the intersection on this alternative. So Tommy, would you mind making everybody able to participate with me?
Of course. So it looks like we've got 16 attendees, so you should all be able to use the button at the bottom of your Zoom screen to raise your hand when the question is prompted, and then we can go ahead and tally it up, and I can report back to you, Jen.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you so much, Tommy. I appreciate it. Okay, so for the intersection, could I have raised hands for who prefers alternative one? And I know, Reg, you can raise, you might want to let me know later how many of you voted for which alternative, since I know there's a number of you sitting there.
All right, so for attendees, I am seeing 4 out of 16 hands raised, and for panelists, I am seeing 1.
Okay, and at the same, just at the intersection, who has a preference for alternative 2? Karen, do you want to switch to alternative 2? Oh, great.
Okay, give folks just another second to raise their hand and cast their vote. At this time, I'm seeing 6 out of the 16 attendees and 2 panelists, 7 out of the 16. Nope, back to 6. Okay. Somebody's changing them, yes.
Excellent.
Back up to, so sorry, 7 attendees, looks like the final count, and 1 panelist.
7 and 1, great. And then switching to alternative 3, just for the intersection itself.
All right, again, if anybody would like to vote for alternative 3, you can use the raise hand button at the bottom of the Zoom screen. And at this time, I just see 1 for alternative 3.
All right, great. Moving on. So thinking about the Merchants Row area, thinking of the different alternatives just for this parking area. could I have raised hands just for alternative 1?
All right, give folks just a couple more seconds to cast their vote. This time I'm seeing 5 and 1.
Right,
6 and 1 now.
6 and 1, okay. And then for alternative 2.
All right, we'll give folks just a couple more seconds. For alternative 2, I'm seeing 7 and 1.
Okay.
8 and 1 now.
Okay. And for alternative 3. Again, just at Merchants Row.
And for this one, I'm just seeing 2.
Okay. All right, moving over to Canada Street. What do we have for support for alternative 1?
Give folks just a couple more seconds to cast.
Mhm.
It is 7 and 1.
Okay.
7
And
and 2 just changed. 8
Okay.
and 2 now.
Okay, 8 and 2.
Yes.
Alternative 2.
All right, folks, just a reminder for alternative 2, you can use the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom window. For alternative 2, there are just 2.
Okay. Can I just ask a quick question? Because I'm very curious. If this instead was in the westbound direction, a shared bike lane and not a separate bike lane, and the parking was regular angled parking, would that have generated more favor? If I were to modify alternative 2 to kind of be a mix between 1 and 2, how many folks might have voted for that?
Looks like we've got 11 hand raises in the attendees, 2 in the panelists.
I had a feeling that was going to be the case, which is why I asked, because there's no reason we can't do little tweaks like that based on the feedback that we've received. Okay. Alternative 3, I fear I don't really have to ask, but I'm going to ask alternative 3 on Canada Street.
All right, seeing none.
Okay. Yes, I had a feeling once I got 11 and 2 on the last one. All right, moving right along. There we go. So on the Grand Avenue and Church Street. Now, keeping in mind, again, that if the roundabout isn't a chosen alternative, think about quarter wide, looking at the lower pictures to what the cross sections would look like. Alternative 1, again, parking on one side of the street, bike lanes are on Grand Avenue, so that bike connection is on Grand Avenue. How many folks are in support of alternative 1?
Okay, giving folks just a couple more seconds. Looks like we've leveled out at 4.
Okay. And alternative 2, which splits those bikes, so some of them are on Grand Ave and southbound is on Church Street.
Okay, for this one, I'm just seeing 2.
Okay.
3 overall now,
Okay.
and 1 panelist, so 4.
Okay. And then for alternative 3, which keeps things much the same on Grand Avenue, but does make some modifications to Church to accommodate cyclists.
Give folks just a couple more seconds. At this moment, I'm seeing 5 and 2.
Okay. Great. And then for our final discussion is for that connection down the hill to the Marble Mill Park. How many folks are in favor of what's shown on concept 1?
All right, it looks like folks' votes are still coming in. At this moment, I am seeing 8 and 2,
Right.
9 and 2.
Oh, okay. For alternative 2?
For alternative 2, we are at 3.
Okay, and alternative 3.
And for alternative 3, we are at 2.
Great. Thank you so much for that. That's very helpful for us when we get together. Karen, do you want to just talk about the next steps, how we'll take this information?
Can we talk for a minute about the First Street? Maybe I'm confused.
Mhm.
The First Street, Grand Avenue intersection. Are
Yes.
we looking at just doing, is it kind of a given that we're going to do an always stop there? Is that the proposal?
That is the recommendation.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to be clear that any of the alternatives would include that always stop there. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. So with things being the way they are and the circumstances around us all being virtual, my proposal in terms of next steps starts with just collecting input and giving folks a little bit of time with all of the various options that we went through today to provide any feedback. So on the next slide, I am going to provide my email address. So if folks walk away and then have, 3 more thoughts that they want to share about what we saw this evening, and I think we're also going to try to post somewhere the recording of this meeting so that if folks want to double back to any of the alternatives that we discussed, they'll be able to do that. So I want to welcome comment and feedback from the community, and I was trying to give it a reasonable cutoff date, so I'm proposing February 12th as a cutoff for additional comment on what we've discussed tonight. And then we're really going to work through the selection of the preferred improvement, which will be a collection of the alternatives that we talked through this evening, refining that to carry forward to a presentation with the village trustees, hopefully getting their support for the final recommendations in the final report going forward, so that really laying that groundwork for projects in the future for the downtown. So that is sort of the next steps. The time frame for that, we originally scoped out to May for the final report, and so I think we're well within that target for getting everything wrapped up and making some final recommendations.
Before we move on, I'm going to put him on the spot just a little bit. We have Jim Coda, if you want. So we have Jim Coda, who is the District 8 V-Trans. And I just, I know it's a Class 1 town highway and all of that, but I just wanted to give him an opportunity to, if he had any concerns, questions, comments, to put them out there in particular.
So Jim, I'm going to give you the permission to unmute yourself, and you should be able to unmute now.
Okay, that was the secret. I was going to say I can't talk. It's whatever's going to work for the community. I'm going to support. I'm a technician, so I get way down into the weeds of drainage, and roundabouts have a lot of drainage issues and things like that. I don't want to get too technical on you. So, you guys come up with your concepts that you want in your community, and I'll forward them to Dave Blackmore, and we'll do all we can to support. I am concerned a little bit about safety, and we do have some pretty big tractor trailer trucks out there. So when we push them one way or the other, it would be a shame to see the trailer roll up on a sidewalk and hurt somebody. So yeah, I'll support you, Elizabeth.
Thank you. And I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I thought since we had you, and I do appreciate you taking the time. So
yeah, thank you for joining us. And we're happy to share with you, Jim, our truck turning templates and how we laid out our alternatives, just to give you that additional level of comfort with what we've shown.
No, I don't need that. Okay. Jennifer, I trust you guys. I mean, just wanted to bring it up.
Mm-hmm. Reg, did someone there have something you wanted to add?
I'd just like to thank Jim Cota also for sitting in on this evening and taking an interest in this, and appreciate his support in this project as well.
You're welcome, Rich. Anytime.
Thanks, Jim.
Great. And Gordon, did you want to add something?
No, I had my hand up earlier but then Elizabeth called on Jim. I didn't know he was on the line, just to maybe quickly go over next steps once we choose a plan and the trustees accepted something, what happened. But I'll just take the time to thank you and everyone else for their hard work on this. And we've really come a long way since you first started presenting, and we got a great turnout tonight. So thank you for all the comments and all your work on the project. We look forward to seeing your next rendition and hopefully keep moving forward.
And to that point, Gordon, I do want to mention, while I have 21 people in the audience, the village did put in an application for a Better Places grant that will take some of these elements and do a demonstration project around it if we get funded. So it would give us an opportunity to test drive, so to speak, some of these options, to see how we like them, how they work. We're not going to put in a roundabout for many reasons, so that's not an option, but that would be an opportunity to test the reverse angle parking and do some education, or to just play around with some of the options, to see what our level of comfort is and get a lot of feedback. The other thing I'll say quickly is that putting this report, whatever it looks like, on a shelf, to me is not an option. We do that a lot, or we have done that a lot in the past, and I really am committed, and I think the community is committed to doing something in this area that makes it safer for everybody who travels in it, to it, around it, who has avoided it because it's just a weird place to go through. So I appreciate everybody showing up virtually, and we did talk about that, Darcy. That would be part of the, sorry, Darcy had a comment. We did talk about that in some meetings. The handicap accessibility is on our radar, because that is an important part of that area. And it's actually on the radar in front of Merchants Row and along the Cody's post office area too. So we have that in mind, and that is something that we'll be looking at as this process goes forward. But again, thank you, and we will be moving forward. It may take some time, but I think maintaining the status quo is not an option.
Well, thank you all. This was a very lively group. We collected a lot of information. We appreciate your feedback, and please do take advantage. Karen, do you want to put up your email address now? Please reach out to Karen and provide her with any other feedback that you might have as we move forward, just to help us as we fine tune kind of what the vision for the village is. Everyone have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.